Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 256, Teaching Expression from Day One with Craig Hurley and Rebecca Atkins. This is going to be added to the First Days of Choir series, not because it was planned, but because it was totally serendipitous that right after I finish one of the most popular series that I've ever done on the show, the First Days of Choir series, inspired by Harry Wong's book, The First Days of School, I also have, falling into my lap, Craig and Rebecca wanting to talk about the reasons and the research behind the idea that we should not be waiting until week 3, week 4, week 5 to start talking about and teaching principles of singing with expression, that in fact that also should be occurring on day one. So we're going to throw this into that series as well. And in this episode, the two researchers, Craig and Rebecca, and I delve into effective strategies for teaching musical expression. We explore how integrating expression from the start can transform choir performances, classroom experiences, and learn about the innovative techniques such as using physical movement to teach dynamics, the importance of auditory cues, and the role of emotional connection in music. I learn a lot about how to engage with both auditory and visual elements and get to hear Rebecca and Craig talk about inspiring stories about fostering creativity and expression in young musicians. Whether you're a seasoned teacher like me with the gray hair or brand new to teaching, this episode offers valuable insights and practical tips to elevate your teaching approach. So stick around all the way to the end. You're going to want to hear this jam-packed episode. And then I want to hear your ideas about teaching expression, some of your challenges and successes and wins over on the Choralosophers Facebook page. Choir directors, music educators, show planners, you pour your heart into your music. Shouldn't your events get the same attention? That's where Ludus comes in. Sell tickets, promote your concerts, and fundraise with ease. Selling merchandise and concessions? Ludus Retail makes in-person sales effortless. Running choir camps or workshops? They have a classes feature that keeps registration simple, and when you need help, the live support team is ready to pop up with real answers from real people. The best part? It's completely free for organizations. Thousands of music programs already trust Ludus because great music deserves more than just a ticketing system. Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com. I'm not sure how much, if anything, out there has not gone up in price since 2020, but I know one thing that hasn't, and that is the membership to the Patreon and to the Substack to support this show. The people who are signed up over there as paid subscribers, as my thank you to them, they can get things like t-shirts from the choralosophy.com shop. They can also get access to my Google folder of teaching materials that I've talked about on the show for over the years. And of course, they just want to help make sure that this show can continue. And one of those benefits is a shout out on the show. Shout outs for the Inner Circle and producer tiers over on Patreon. We have Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Rebecca Chalk, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. All right, everybody. I am here with Rebecca Atkins and Craig Hurley, and we're going to be talking about the roadblocks, but also strategies and things that we can employ to get our singers to connect more, to express more. And they've been doing some work on this topic and have some ideas for us to mull over. So I'm super excited about this, getting advice from you guys, because it's not one of my strengths. And I would love to learn more here in front of everybody. So Rebecca and Craig, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's awesome. So let's jump in by learning just a little bit about each of you first. Rebecca, why don't you tell us kind of the short elevator pitch for your bio? Like, where do you come from? What do you do? What are the things that excite you in your work, your professional life?
I'm originally from Austin, Texas, and I got my undergrad back in the 90s and started teaching choir. I taught 14 years in the public school setting before I went back for my master's degree, and I always loved having student teachers and training teachers, so I went back for my PhD so I could start doing that as well. Fell in love with the research side I didn't even know about until my PhD, and that's where I am now. So I'm at the University of Georgia and work with graduate students on research and teaching and learning, and then, of course, train future music educators.
That's awesome. You're a saint. Craig, who are you? What do you do every day?
Sure. I just started year 26 of teaching elementary music. And so that's my, 30 classes a week, day-to-day job. I've also worked with the Spivey Hall Children's Choir program for the last 19 years. I just started year 20. And for 18 years, I worked with a beginning choir, mostly 5th and 6th graders, kind of entry-level students. And then about a year ago, my mentor retired, Martha Shaw. And so I took over as artistic director about a year ago. And so now I work with the older two choirs, which is mainly 6th graders to seniors in high school. And I've been loving that. It's been a whole new adventure. And almost about 9 years ago, I started my doctorate at University of Georgia, which is where I met Rebecca. And she was my dissertation supervisor. So that's how we got connected. And then since I graduated, we've been working and writing and researching together ever since.
That's amazing. And I love how those collegialities can continue into the future, even after we've graduated and gone on and done other things. That's really awesome. One of the things that I wanted to jump in with right away is I have a form. It's a shout out on my website. You can go and submit episode ideas, and Craig came onto that form and filled out the form in a way that really grabbed me right away, because again, I mentioned as in the intro that getting choirs to sing with expression is not one of my strengths. I'm not terrible in getting them to connect in there, but I never really quite feel like I've done enough. And especially I always hear people talking about how this generation of kids seems to even be more kind of zoned out. I don't know if you guys have heard about like the Gen X or Gen Z stare people are talking about on the internet now. So I don't care who answers this. Feel free to fight over this amongst yourselves. But where did this work between the two of you start? Where did the idea come from to look into and do some research on singing with expression?
So it started, I was searching for a dissertation topic. And I knew I wanted to do singing. I knew I wanted to do youth because that's who I was working with all the time. And like you, I didn't feel confident teaching expression. And I had heard expressive choirs and loved it. And at the time, I was having some success, but not a whole lot teaching expression with my choirs. And so I was in class with Rebecca, and she said something, and she was like, "Never let them sing incorrectly." And I was like, huh? And it just kind of threw me for a loop and kind of made me think differently. And what she was saying was, as soon as you teach a song, make it concert ready, at least that section. And that was something I had never really thought about before. And then I was reading a bunch of articles, trying to figure out what I wanted to do my dissertation. Because when you do a dissertation, you start really wide and you focus on this really tiny thing in music. And so I read this article by Camille Yarborough. And what she did, she had watched Robert Shaw rehearse, videos of Robert Shaw rehearsing, Atlanta Symphony Orchestra Chorus. Robert Shaw did it forever. He's amazing. And so she would write down his sequences and the things that he would do for rehearsal. And one of the things that he did was he would separate the elements of a song, and he thought the elements of a song were rhythm, pitch, text, and expression, and he would combine them in different ways. And so if you've ever sung in a Robert Shaw chorale, he was famous for count singing, and they would count sing up to like 2 rehearsals before the concert, and they would count sing not even on pitch, but they would do it musically and expressively, and just things that I had never thought about to do with my choir. Because I had always thought about, you teach the rhythm and then you add the pitch and then you add the text and then expression always comes at the end, kind of like the ice cream sundae idea. And so I was actually taking my younger Spivey choir to our state conference that year. And so I tried it, and I had this whole, spreadsheet and all this stuff where what I was going to do. And I taught them with expression baked in the whole time. So as soon as we introduced the song, expression was part of the process. And we had a wonderful performance. I was so proud of the performance. It was so great. And I was like, this worked for me in this situation. I wonder if it's transferable to other things. And so that's how I decided I want to explore this further and make it my dissertation topic. And that's kind of where the whole research line began.
I see. That's interesting. Now, Rebecca, do you have a side of this story? What is your connection to the topic other than just that you were supervising Craig?
I think I vividly remember when I graduated from my undergrad degree, people going, I want to teach high school because we get to do more expressive music and harder music. And I just want to make really great music. And I thought, middle schoolers can be really expressive. Look at elementary kids. They are so creative. You don't even have to ask much from them. And they do all these cool things that we don't think about kids doing. And so I kind of made it my goal to be really expressive from the get-go with my choirs, and it kind of started that way, almost as a challenge. Wow, I had tearful moments with my middle schoolers. I mean, kids that you would never expect could have that kind of emotion and show it through musical expression. And so I started there, and when Craig started talking to me about this topic, of course, my eyes lit up because I love this part and was really interested in really looking at the teaching and learning side of it. Because our textbooks, if you go through all the choral textbooks we use at the university level that have been written that are all really great, there's a lot of different attitudes about teach notes and rhythms first, then expression, or teach expression first. They all kind of say different things, and there's no real set way. And I don't think there is a set way, but I wanted to just test, okay, let's take expression and see if we can narrow down the variables a bit and figure out about the timing, about the difficulty level, and see what we learn from that. And so when Craig brought this topic to me, I was excited, and it just kind of went from there. And we've been systematically teasing out variables along the way with each one of our studies. And we're using real kids in classes, in schools that are singing in choirs. And so feels very applicable to what we do on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as the research has been ongoing ever since your dissertation, and am I understanding the story correctly that even after you graduated, Craig, there was more research after? Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Yes, we've done an article a year since I graduated.
Okay. That's awesome. So what are we discovering? In other words, this is where I would like maybe Craig, if you take this, so like what are we learning? Because Rebecca mentioned there's no one set way, but I would hope that we're starting to get some hints at certain things that work well, certain things that maybe when researched don't work super well. Are we getting any kind of a signal, so to speak, from this research?
Right. Well, I think what makes teaching expression somewhat challenging is two different directors can do the same song expressively in different ways.
Yeah.
Whereas, they're going to have the same rhythm, they're going to have the same pitches, they're going to have the same text, and they both could be considered an expressive performance, but have different takes on it, right? And so there's not this set formation like if something's flat, we know it's flat for the most part, whereas you can interpret expression differently. We know that there's lots of different strategies to teach expression. There's lots of different categories and all are successful depending on your students, depending on the teacher, depending on the song. For example, there's lots of oral strategies, so listening to expressive examples. Teacher modeling is huge, and I'm sure lots of conductors use that day in and day out. There's direct instruction where you just say, at measure 28, you sing piano, and at measure 32, you do forte. It can be effective as well. There's lots of research supporting adding a physical component to teaching expression. So what I do in my choir is on staccatos, we flick. On accents, we do our elbows. On smooth parts, we put your hands on a river. So adding that physical element to kind of express those expressive qualities, snapping the cutoff so we're all together, and even having your students conduct so they can feel different meters and feel different types of conducting can be effective. There's also a teaching expression visually. So students watching the conductor, right? So our conducting should mimic the expressiveness of the song, and students should feel that. Something I do with my elementary kids all the time is I'll pull the expression out. So in elementary land, a lot of times we'll pull one element out. So we'll take a song and we'll pull the rhythm out. We'll work on the rhythm, they'll read the rhythm, and then we'll teach them the rest of the song by rote. But we like to do one literacy element. Another strategy, I'll pull the text out and I'll add things accents, sideways V's for accents. And, if it's loud, I make the text bigger, quiet, make the text smaller, stuff like that. So they can really see what I'm asking for, on my screen with the text. And it's just another way to communicate what you want and try to communicate with the students what you're asking for in the song. Of course, there's text connection and finding that personal connection with the text, how you connect with it, how they can connect with it. And then there's also this visual aspect of expression that is somewhat controversial, but in study again, it's shown that it really has a big effect. And what I mean by that is there's a study with pianists and they all have the same exact audio, but one pianist is very still and rigid, one kind of moves a little bit, and one's overly expressive, and the people watching will rate the one that moves the most as the most expressive performance, even though the audio was exactly the same. And it's the same thing they've done it with a band composer, they've done it with choirs, and choirs that move more and their movement matches the expression and the character of the song rate more expressive than ones that stand very stoically. And it's just, as an audience member, your perception of what they're doing. Even though the audio of the choir is exactly the same and they're actually just as musically expressive, you interpret that differently by what you see.
Yeah. I've always heard from mentors that audiences hear what they see, and they will. And one of the ways I communicate that to students is that the audience will forgive a wrong note that you don't show them because you've hidden it inside of a bunch of expressive singing.
Yeah.
But when we stand stoically, they have nothing else to focus on. So they're even the layperson is more likely to hear those little foibles or imperfections because it's multi sensory, right? So when we have the visual aspect of it as well, we're learning from the body language as the audience members, etc. So that's really interesting. Rebecca, I'm curious. So I'm kind of putting this story from your perspective through now. You had been a teacher prior to your current position, and then you start doing this research. So now my curiosity, don't mean to put you on the spot here, but you had taught for 14 years, you said. Were there any go-to, like some of your favorite ways to get singers to sing with expression that then you started seeing this research and you said, ooh, I was doing something right. That's great. Or do you have any stories of like the opposite of that? Like, ooh, I'm learning now from this research, I could have done this differently, since you kind of sit in a different position than either of us where you're in that research position. So I don't know if that question made sense.
No, it does. I think, one of the strategies that I used a lot was metaphor. That worked really well to help my students be expressive. They had to find some kind of connection to the music that also fit them. So having them tell stories. I think the one that I use now more than I did back then is compare contrast. Turn and talk to your neighbor about the differences that you hear. And so I'll do it wrong, or I'll sing it one way and then I'll sing it a different way, and let the students really start understanding what that sounds and starting to use words. I wish I had done a lot more of that in those 14 years of just letting the students figure out what they were hearing and how to do it. So questions like, okay, we heard it crescendo. Well, what happened with your breath? Anything changed during that crescendo? What happened so I think a lot of that self-discovery, because every singer is just a little bit different, and them understanding. I mean, I was really good at standing at the podium telling them what to do in those years. And I did a lot of turn to your neighbor and talk about things, try this, try that. But if I could go back and take everything I've learned, I think I would turn the whole rehearsal over to the students, and they probably would sing even more expressively than what I told them to do. So that's been a big part of the takeaway of some of my research, maybe not just the research with Craig, but just in general. I think also we just get better at reading the room, because some things that I might ask students to do, like if I'm adding some kinesthetic support to learn what forte is like, get really big, or there are some kids that are concentrating so much on one thing, that's too much for them to do. And so I've learned to use some of my expressive teaching as a differentiation instruction. So I'll say something like, okay, in sight reading, for example, we're all conducting the time. If you sang it really well and made no mistakes, I want you to add this, we can't show here, add this gesture while you sight sing and sing. Yeah. So that'll be that really high challenge task for somebody that wants that high challenge task. If you were missing all the hand signs, concentrate on the hand signs and sing that part. But if you got all the hand signs and all the notes, add a crescendo and decrescendo anywhere that you think it would make it sound more beautiful. Trying to turn our sight reading activities into real beautiful music rather than just a sight reading activity, and give kids choices, kind of like in aerobics or some kind of class that you have to modify if you need to modify because you have a knee injury or whatever you do. Just having these things that students can do, they choose what to do that's at the level that they can do well, so they feel successful at the end. So I think that's another thing. If I could go back from all the research I've done and I've read and I've learned since that time, those are the things I would add.
That's awesome, and that's a really good reflection, and it also had me thinking about things that I would do, especially with what Craig said earlier about like the idea that we can start teaching the expression alongside of things like count singing even, or singing solfege. The kids could get the instruction to do that. So one of the things that I've been doing for years, and now I'm inspired to add to this, but one of the things I've been doing for a long time is in that situation that Rebecca just described, where the kids maybe have gotten the right notes and rhythms pretty quickly. So then what do you do next? Even if it's like a sight reading factory exercise that I do a lot of, is I'll have them sing with a different vocal color the second time. Or let's do more crescendos, decrescendos, or whatever. But what I could also do is I could say something like, okay, we got the notes and rhythms down. Now sing it like it's the happiest song you've ever heard. And there's no words. You just have to show and how would that affect your tone quality? How would that affect your facial expression, your body alignment, your engagement, or whatever? If this was a really happy 8-measure song, or something like that, just to get them practicing those other elements. Does this seem like it would be kind of up the alley of what you guys are talking about? I don't know if you've heard about it. If you haven't heard about it, you've got to go try 3-Minute Theory. You can go to 3minutetheory.com and you can check it out now. When you decide to get this comprehensive system of pre-made materials for your music theory related concepts, you just go into that account and pull out tons of ready-made material. I don't think you'll be even able to teach all of it in 1 year. It's so much stuff that you can tailor make and custom make to your needs. So go check it out, and of course use the Choralosophy discount code when you sign up to get a 15% discount on your membership.
Yes, I've started incorporating expressive elements into my warm-ups and my literacy component, and it makes it more fun.
Mm-hmm.
It does. And it just like we pull out those vocal technique skills, we pull out those literacy skills and then put them back into our literature. It's the same idea where you're pulling out those skills, focusing on them, and then when you get to your literature time, they've already learned it, so you can just put it right back into that song.
Yeah, it's almost like we're cross-pollinating.
Right.
Throughout the entire rehearsal. Yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
And I was going to think the other thing I think I would have thought more about, I was always like trying to get ready for the performance. And so to me, it was, let's teach the repertoire. I would now, going back, I'd spend more time on teaching the musical elements and just use the repertoire as the thing they apply it to. And so really coming up with a central idea so that we're getting lots of repetition on one thing. So if today it's learning how to make a bigger difference between your fortes, your pianos, your mezzo pianos and mezzo fortes, we practice that the whole period. They get lots of feedback from me on that. They give each other feedback on, was that different enough or not? Letting the first row sing and letting the second row evaluate if it needed a bigger difference, things like that, just so they have more practice. And so by the time they leave class, I'm confident that they can go home and actually produce a forte sound and make mezzo forte sound a little bit different without me being around.
Yeah, that's great. Now, I wonder, before we get too much further into specific examples that have popped up in your research and kind of talking it more in depth about those, another curiosity has bubbled up for me, which is most so far of what we've been talking about seems to be visual things that we can see. And of course, we know that not every audience member sees well, but also that there are elements of music that are really just auditory. So does your research get into that at all? Like what are the ways that we would teach singers to be more expressive that have nothing to do with what we see? Or is that really just not what we're talking about here? Help me understand that.
Actually, all of our research is about the auditory. So there is not any, we've not started the visual component yet. There's other people's research that has done that, but that's something on our list one day to keep adding on. So, what basically we've done is we've taken 4 simple things: forte, piano, staccato, legato, and taught students songs through mostly a rote sequence, though they could see the music. And we taught them a song that they learned the rhythm and pitch first with the text, no expression, then added expression at the end. Or they learned a song where they started expression with the rhythm, expression with the text and the pitch. So they were singing the pianos, the legatos, the fortes alongside from the beginning. And we've learned in 3 studies actually, that when they learned that the pianos and the fortes, legatos and staccatos at the very beginning of the learning sequence, they actually performed in their in their last performance more expressively than on the songs they learned the expression at the end. And we learned this in the online setting with solo singing, which was harder to control the variables. And we've learned this in classrooms where we have intact classes singing. And so all the students get to learn a song under both conditions, but their scores were higher on the songs in which they learned expression from the beginning.
Okay. So I think maybe my confusion came from that we were talking about like the standing still versus not standing still, but in some ways we're kind of defining expression through the crescendo. For example, if we hear the crescendo, what does that mean? And what is it expressing? So how would you describe what it is that we're hearing when we hear a crescendo? How do we know that student is being expressive? How do we know that they're not just, getting louder because the teacher told them to? How do I parse that out?
I think you're asking, is that connected to the text necessarily?
Yeah, like I guess I wouldn't necessarily think that a crescendo or a decrescendo is automatically expressive, I guess was what I'm saying. So how do we tell the difference between a expressive crescendo and one that is just rote, one that is just mimicked?
I think for our research, what we were focusing on is those auditory elements
Uh-huh.
because they can be assessed easier. So So do we know that it came from their heart? Not necessarily. Do we know that it was the perfect technique? Not necessarily. We were just wondering, can they learn to sing this part piano and this part forte and this part staccato and this part legato in a 6-minute sequence? And what's going to be the most effective way to get them to do that?
Okay.
But also,
I'm with you. Go ahead.
But I also think that our students also have to learn to make expressive decisions eventually. And that sometimes if they don't learn how to actually do the thing, just being told how to do it first, it's hard for them to actually go, oh, this part of the text is about this. I should sing this legato and piano. I mean, it's baby steps. And so there's kind of the Bloom's taxonomy, I guess, where you are starting out at the recognize and then going to the under the stand and then apply and going up and making the task a little bit harder and a little bit harder. And then eventually you get to the point where, okay, so here's the text. What would you do here to emote this text and give the expression or the emotion that you want here? And so It's a building block. So we're at the bottom, at the very baby stages of that in our research.
Yeah, and that to me, that's interesting because that touches on actually a really big education controversy related to direct instruction anyway, which is that some educators and education researchers would argue that by explicitly teaching the kids to do that, we are just turning them into little machines. But then kind of what Rebecca just said, if they don't know how to do the thing, then they're not going to be able to make those higher level decisions later, or they won't have the tool to do it. And so there are, so there's a little bit of a back and forth. I've been kind of reading that for years. Go ahead.
I think of it as building their vocabulary. And so I'm building their musical expressive vocabulary. And so that once they have all these experiences with the crescendo and dynamics and articulations and all these things, then they can pick from their word box, so to speak, later on when they're making their own decisions. But we've got to fill up their vocabulary first.
And then tie that word box to their technical skill. Because, I mean, you use breath in a different way and you use vowel shape in a different way to do different things. You use your facial expression. That's a little bit higher level. And so taking that and connecting it to their actual vocal technique is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And I wonder, too, if you guys have kind of developed over the years your favorite strategies for, let's say there is a person listening and to this conversation and they fall into the camp of, no, we're just going to get the notes and rhythms first. Like we're going to make sure the notes and rhythms are done and correct, etc. How do you convince them? You're at the bar at a convention or something and you're just arguing about this. How do you convince them that that's the wrong approach and that they can actually fold all these things into the taco at the same time?
So our children's choir kicked off this past weekend. And if this was 10 years ago, so I taught, I don't know if you know the song Deo Gracias from Ceremony of Carols, Britain. Yeah. Deo Gracias. Yeah, it's a pretty famous piece, right? So we're doing that piece in children's choir this semester. And if it was 10 years ago, we would have maybe listened to a recording and then worked on the rhythm and then solfeged it out. And then maybe that was our first rehearsal with, right? And then we'd come back a week later and we'd go over the text and maybe that was week's rehearsal. And then the week after that, we would maybe talk about how this part's accented and this part's legato and kind of apply that to the different things, right? With my elementary kids, I would have, for some reason, I believed that you had to wait till like 2 weeks before the concert to add expression or they would lose it. I don't know why I thought that, but I would always save it, right? This past week, having known this and having done this research, we listened to a recording. They learned that first opening thing super easy. And then we count read the rhythm. And then we went immediately to the expression. So there's accent markings, there's staccatos, there's a legato. So we're reading the rhythm expressively. So they're getting the character of the piece right away. I give them their solfege, they break into circles, they figure out their solfege, they sing it once or twice, we make sure everybody's good, and then immediately, where's the staccato, where's the accents, where's the legato on the solfege, okay? And then we talk about the text. It's really old English, so there's weird words. We have to talk about what they mean and what the poem's about. And then we go to expression, and then those first, I don't know how many measures it is, 12 measures are pretty much concert ready. Like they're good. They're musical. Their pitches are great. Their rhythms are great. They have the text. They know the meaning behind it. And I only did 12 measures of the song, but those 12 measures we could perform next week, right? And the hard thing about it is, and we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but like there's a lot of front end loading. But I know when I come back to that second verse, everything that I taught them about the expression and about the staccatos and legatos and the character piece is going to apply. So there's this front end loading that you do, and then it applies to other things. The other thing that I think that is really effective about this technique is if you think about how many times you repeat a song in the rehearsal process, how many times you practice that rhythm, how many times you practice those pitches, how many times you practice that text. But if we save expression till the end, you're not giving it a fair shake, right? So it's not getting the amount of repetitions that you gave rhythm or that you gave the text or that you gave, the pitches. So in fairness to the students, I'm going to demand, expect, ask for that expression right away from the beginning so that every time we sing Deo Gracias, we're going to sing it with that character and that expression. And whether we get nervous, whether we're tired, whether it's hot on the risers, whatever, they've done it that way for so long that it's ingrained. And hopefully that's what comes out of it.
Yeah. And almost like it would feel weird to the singers to not sing it with expression because they've learned it as this is the way you sing this.
Right.
Is
it's
that
all baked in. It's all part of it.
Yeah.
So we found in talking to students and just Rebecca and I talking that one of the reasons we feel like this way is expressive is because the students only learn their part or their melody one way. And so you're not learning it one way and then coming back a few rehearsals later and adding something to it and adding something to it. Everything's baked in and you've learned the song a particular way and that's the way you perform it, always with expression.
And think about it this way. Singing forte is physically a different motor skill than singing piano. And
Sure.
so, it's if you're playing a sport or if you're doing rehab, you're having to unlearn something that isn't working properly in physical therapy, right? So if we have them doing exactly what we want them to sound like, both through the vocal technique and orally, on the first get-go, it becomes habitual. If you teach a song with an F natural that had an F sharp, it's 21 repetitions to undo that wrong note that I taught. And so this is kind of the same idea to me. If we teach it with the differentiation between these expressive markings from the get-go, they are learning how to do that from a physical sense too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When I was a young teacher, I had a mentor who I loved dearly and learned a lot from, but this was one thing that I thought was a little bit wrong when I heard it as a second or third year teacher, where this person told me that I'm not worried that they just slipped a half or a whole step flat. We'll fix that later. And we've got other things to do now. And I just was panicking in the rehearsal, but they're going to learn it wrong. They're going to learn it wrong, and getting them to get back into the right key is just going to be harder later. And so I feel like this is kind of a similar issue, especially if we're thinking about the muscle, like Rebecca, like you said, of the muscle memory and the technique involved in singing it soft. If we're singing it off the voice or just kind of mimicking marking, and then we learned it that way because we did it for 2 weeks, then cranking it up to full, almost like game speed, so to speak, later on would be very difficult. So I definitely understand what you guys are saying. This makes a lot of sense. Now, my next question then, because now we've been using this term expression to mean a variety of different things. And so if I would kind of put you guys on the spot again and just say, what is your working definition for what is it like, if you were to say, what does it mean for a choir to sing expressive? Could you define that? Which I know we already talked about how that's hard.
A choir that sings expressively uses expressive elements that we have available to us, legato, all those things, volume.
So the musical markings, the articulation, dynamics.
And then adding the emotional connection to the text, which is something we get to do in choral music that's so beautiful, because why do we sing and why do we play instruments? It's for how it makes us feel, right? And for celebration and to dance to and to mourn to, all the things that we get to do through our music. And so when they get that emotional connection and use the articulations and the markings and connect those together, and then of course you add all the beautiful vocal tone and balance and ensemble and all of those things. To me, expressive is figuring out that balance between musical markings and the emotion in the piece.
I like it. Craig, can you take a stab at it too?
Yeah, I would just add the musical markings, but a lot of times I will add things that aren't necessarily in the score. And I think as conductors, we have the privilege to add things to make things more musical. And just because there's not an accent or there's not a tenuto doesn't mean you're not allowed to add that. I thought as a young teacher, I was always like, well, it's not there, so I'm not going to do it. But the more experience I get, I change things all the time and add things and do it. My singers and I collaborate to make things more musical. So it doesn't have to necessarily be written down. You can add things. And I think most composers appreciate that. And then so those expressive, those auditory things, that personal heart connection where you're connected to the piece or telling a story or some background and can communicate that with the audience. And then the visual aspect would be another layer to it.
Yeah. Now, of course, that is contextual to the time period too, which is, I think, important to note of the music, because yes, modern composers would appreciate what you just said.
Sure.
But there was a time when a composer would be quite offended that you chose to add those things, because they would say, "What, do you think I didn't write it expressively enough?
Right.
That you have to add those things?" And so that does change. So, like even the doctrine of affects in the early Baroque, late Renaissance, certain rhythms meant certain things, and certain harmonic motion meant a certain thing, and people back then knew it. And that's why I wanted to ask this question, because what does it mean to sing expressively is of course going to be different across time. It's going to be different across culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's also going to be something that, and this is probably why, Craig, at the very beginning, you said how difficult this would be to measure, which is why you are measuring the things you can actually record. Did they get louder? Did they not get louder?
Yes.
Those, and I think so that's maybe where the fundamental tension of this topic comes from, which is it doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. And some people could say, I stood there stoically and I sang this song without moving a single muscle, but I was being expressive because it's that me being still is the story.
Right.
Me being, I am telling a story of me being petrified, and there are no dynamics in this song because I don't have the inner strength to make that crescendo or whatever. You understand where I'm going with this, of how tricky this is. So is this something that you guys think about is like a next step of how to measure this, or is this just too esoteric to measure?
We have to be creative. I think anything can be measured, and you can tease out enough variables and find ways to measure a lot of things in different ways. So, but it's hard. And I think that's why assessment's hard in what we do too. The time it takes to really think about, am I measuring what I want to measure, and am I reliable? Can I do it twice the same way, or can my friend measure it also? And that's a part of the research that's really tricky as well, is just finding that reliability in the research or in the measurements. And both for us, like Craig and I measure really well together, and we've measured things with other people, and it takes a lot of time in that sense, just like assessment does in the classroom. So I think it is esoteric, but I think it can be done. It's hard to tease out all the variables. So many things come into play when you're doing the research side of it.
The research side of me totally agrees with Rebecca and can pull that out and do certain things so that we can learn about stuff. But then there's a part of me that loves the mystery of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about my greatest choral experiences, and I don't even know why they were great necessarily. I can't describe it necessarily, but I was there and I felt it and it was amazing. And that's enough for me sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if, because it's so hard to measure, I wonder if this is partly where some of the resistance from some of our colleagues comes from in bringing their choirs to that place of expressivity. Because as it's so subjective, you could watch your colleague from down the road, you could watch their choir and be super critical. And I know, because I've sat in audiences at conventions where everybody just complains about each other's choirs and talks about how not whatever they are. And you could say, oh, it's so dry, so not expressive. Meanwhile, the choir that just performed, in your opinion, as dry and not expressive, just came off the stage crying because they had such a moving experience that they felt together. And you just weren't privy to that, right? So there's an opinion, and I wonder if that's why some of us kind of give up on it. You guys have thoughts on that?
Well, when I'm talking to people, the kind of research that Rebecca and I are doing are on humans and young people. And we're not biologists. We're not dealing with chemicals in a controlled environment that behave the same way every single time they interact, right? Every single kid is different. You do the same exact thing with 100 kids and you'll get 100 different results. So I always say, these strategies and these ideas are worth considering. And we found through our research and our data that these are worth considering, and they have worked for us, and we have seen success with them, and we think you should try them. We never make statements like, this is the way to do it, and you have to do it this way. If you're not doing it this way, you're wrong. But what I hope happens with our research is people think about their process and think about their sequences and kind of try something new and try something different and see if it works in their situation and see if it helps their students and helps their performance.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about some of those sequences. What are some of the things that you would kind of, maybe you're teaching a session on this and you're at that part of the session where you're giving those practical tips that everybody loves to have. How would you describe that?
I think one thing that almost is my go-to, I always do something rote first, getting them able to do whatever the skill is that I want. So if it's a contrast or forte to piano, for example, and then finding a place in the music where that would be, and then letting them apply that concept to the music. I think that priming of the skill before they get the visual part with the notation, I think is really important and has worked really well for my students just because they know they can do it. And then they get excited when they find it and they see how to apply it. And so finding ways for them to be successful really fast and using much shorter chunks of music, depending upon the level of the choir. So if it's a 4-part harmony and they're just starting harmony, I might only have one phrase that we figure out in that time period, just absolutely beautifully musically within, and then put it back in context. But I usually try to prime them and warm up with an activity or a couple of warm-ups that is the concept I'm going to really focus on, and then have them find it in the music and apply it again and again. And that works well for me.
Like a copy paste almost. Like you teach them how to do it in one place and then they go find other places where they can apply it.
Then they can transfer it to all of those other places. And once they learn a skill and a concept, they are able to transfer it to a different piece of music because they understand the concept itself, not just within the context of one piece of music.
Yeah, Craig, how about you? Any good tips?
As far as sequences go, I just think with my elementary kids, we do a lot of things by rote in elementary school. And so instead of going straight to pitch, I may model the song, have them echo the text, but echo it expressively and speak the song in rhythm expressively before they get to the pitches, and then, phrase by phrase the pitches, but then really bake that expression in from that first part just so that it's always part of the song.
Yeah. And so when you say model the song, you just mean sing it once, so that they can hear the finished product.
Yep.
And then you're breaking it down into those little elements. Now, when you do that sequence, are they echoing back those elements and then you're assessing whether or not they're ready to go on? Or is this walk me through it like I've never taught elementary school, because I haven't.
So Ghost of John is one of my kids' favorite because it's spooky and fun.
Yeah.
And so, have you seen the Ghost of John? That song. So you sing the song, you sing it expressively, you add the boo, and then I will start with just speaking it. Have you seen the Ghost of John? That kind of thing, where they know where the target word is, they know to crescendo up to go back from it, and so they're speaking all those elements, and we get those expressive elements inside it. And then once they're successful with that, once they can do the whole thing without me, independently, expressively, then we'll go back and phrase by phrase the pitches. So I'll sing it to them, they sing it back to me, and then we'll add that up to where they can sing the whole thing expressive.
Yeah, okay. That's great. And then when we're talking about these sequences of kind of, like you just described, of rote back and forth, are there other strategies, other types of longer term? So that, like you just kind of described a lesson maybe.
Yes.
How does that then carry into, say, a term, like a spring term or a fall semester or whatever it is that you're trying to make sure that these things are scaffolded over time? Do you guys have thoughts about that too?
I think when you're picking repertoire for a semester or for a season or for a concert, hopefully you're going to have lots of different expressive options within your concert, right? So you'll hit lots of different areas. And so I think you're going to bake those in early, and those will apply to that song. And then hopefully they can apply cross songs as well as you develop, your concert, your cycle, getting ready for your concert.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, what about, this is just one of my struggles with this concept when in class in high school, is what about the kid who just doesn't? Like everyone else is doing it, and you've got a kid, because typically they go together. So in other words, the kid who is also deadpan and not showing any expression is oftentimes also the kid who is not doing the crescendo. They're not doing the decrescendo. They're not doing the articulation. They've gotten to the notes and rhythms and they're done. In fact, I had a student last year that was in this situation. This kid got pulled out of class. We were talking about it because it wasn't just, that was not why he was in trouble. It was also like he would get to the notes and rhythms and be done and want to distract other kids, etc. And the feedback I gave him was because he was a football player and I was a football player. And I said, if you were at football practice and you were just standing on the middle of the field not doing anything, and the coach came over to yell at you for not doing anything, and your response was, well, I memorized the playbook, coach.
Yeah.
then what would his response be? And he was like, yeah, I probably would get in trouble. Yeah. And so, and to me, like these are all the things that a lot of kids struggle to understand. So what are your thoughts about that kid who's maybe resistant to the expressive elements? Rebecca, do you have any thoughts about this?
Well, yeah, as a piano teacher too, a lot of the piano books actually start with expression and have everything expressive from the very beginning. And so, but so many of the students, I learned all the notes and rhythms, I'm done. And if I don't really stay on them at the beginning about expression, I'm like, well, but how was that staccato? Or how was that piano? Did you hear a difference here? Or I ask a question, how did you show the difference between this phrase and this phrase? If I didn't stay on them in my feedback from the beginning, they turn off too. I mean, in my choirs too. And I think in some ways, if you start with expression and just keep pounding them on it, then they have to do it. And then they don't think they've learned the piece. And so, I don't teach the song very fast. It's a slow process to work expression at the beginning, and it feels like you're not going to get there. And then all of a sudden it's there and plenty of time for the performance, and pieces start coming together faster and faster because they know how to do all of these different elements at this point. So, we've all been there with that kid, but I think they all like to say, but I know that the song is good enough. So I think
any thoughts on that kid, Craig?
I think setting up your class, and I'm not saying you didn't do this, I'm sure you did, but setting up that team mentality from the beginning so that they're a part. And I loved your analogy how they're part of the process. I also do a lot of octets. And so, I'll pull kids out and they have to do whatever. And so, talking about, usually there's a friend or somebody that can talk to them. Maybe it can talk to them a different way than I can as the teacher. I've done that before. And then I've also pulled them out and let them watch other people to see what I want. And then also, every kid is different, and my goal for every kid is to improve, and that's going to be at a different rate and a different process for every kid. And so maybe their goal is to do X, Y, and Z, whereas another kid's goal is to do something different. But this is what, straight up assessment. This is what's happening. This is what I need you to do. Here's the next step for you that I want to see in the next week. Something like that, where they break it down into smaller steps for them.
One other thing that I thought about as y'all were talking is having students set their own goals with their singing. And so a lot of times there's no time to grade 1 million performance tests when you have a choir of 300, right? And so I would have students hold their phones. We'd be in a choir setting and they would sing, and I'd say, okay, the goal is that you do this crescendo and decrescendo, and we'd perform maybe the whole piece or just one section, but then they go back and fill out a rubric and find the places that they did not sing loud or they did not sing soft, because that was the test. The test was to sing it with the fortes and the pianos. And when they hear themselves not do it, they'll do it again better. Or I have them turn and listen to their neighbors and sing for each other. So there's, 60 people, 30 people are singing, and give each other advice on how to make that sound different. That really, really worked well. It felt safe because it wasn't singing by themselves. It was for their buddy that they sing next to all the time. And they're helping each other get better. And then they set goals. And if the goal is to be musical and expressive all the time, then that becomes kind of the culture. But those are some ideas that may work for people.
Now, okay, so I have a kind of a spontaneous thing to have you guys react to here. So it's because we talked from the very beginning about the difference between the expression that we can see and then the type you're researching because we can measure it, et cetera, the type you can hear. So I'm not even sure that I agree with this statement. I'm just going to say this statement. I want to see what you guys think. It doesn't matter if we can see the expression, if we can't hear it. Thoughts?
In controlled research settings, the findings are the perception of the audience there is a lot to the visual element of that. But I think each of us as an audience member or as a teacher listening, we're in a different place every time and we have a different experience with that music. And so it's complex because there's a lot of other things in play. I think I may have gotten off track with your question. I don't know if I agree with that statement completely, but I do know that anytime I go and clinic a group that's singing some piece that's hallelujah, and they're singing hallelujah because they're thinking so hard, and I give them permission to actually be overjoyed, just like the meaning of the word. The sound is so different, and then I have them talk about how different that sound was. And so I think sometimes we're doing 14 different things, tasks we're switching between, thinking about breath and tone and piano and all of the things. And I think sometimes giving them permission to just let loose a little bit and really explore just that element makes it really interesting and a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Craig? Thoughts about that distinction, the visual versus the auditory?
I think think of it backwards, whereas the audio expression has to be there and the visual enhances it. So we've got to have those, those auditory expressive qualities within our singing. And in order to communicate that to the audience, your visual has to match. Because there's a really interesting study. I love this one. And it was a speech study. And it basically said that visual trumps oral. And what they did was the researcher would mouth one word, but they'd hear a different word. And they'd always go with what they saw. And so those visual cues are stronger to humans than our auditory cues. And so you've got to have those auditory cues in there. You've got to be expressive with your music, but those visual cues help communicate that what you're trying to say to the audience.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. One of the ways that I explain this to kids in a singing context specifically, whether it be in a musical or in choir or whatever, is that I will ask them things like, when you are listening to your mom talk, how do you know she's mad? And she's on the phone. You can't even see her. How do you know she's mad? And of course, eventually they're high school students, so they're budding reasoning and critical thinkers at that age. And so they get to the point where, okay, so what we're really talking about is the tone quality of her voice changes. So in choir, that our vocab word is timbre.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The pitch of her voice changes. So that's our pitch. And the way she articulates and emphasizes different words changes. And so I say, well, that's our rhythm. That's our articulation. And so we actually can hear, even without seeing, we can hear
absolutely
these elements. And I think we've distilled it down to a really good way to think of it between the three of us, which is what Craig said and what Rebecca said earlier, which is that we've got to hear it, but the visual element emphasizes it, brings it out. And then also for our audiences, some of them maybe can't even hear it. They do need to just see it because they're not trained to listen for it. Thoughts?
An audience member, I think it's confusing when they don't match. When maybe the auditory is expressive, but the visual doesn't match. Like Rebecca was saying with the hallelujah, maybe they have this buoyant tone, but their eyebrows are telling me something different. So you kind of get a miscommunication, right? Where you're getting two different signals from the singers and you're like, what do you mean? I don't understand. And a lot of times we let visual win. So your visual has to match. Everything has to match in order to communicate it clearly.
Yeah. So you're saying the hips do lie sometimes. Yeah. Okay. This makes a lot of sense. I think let's wrap this up with some ways that you guys would advocate for to get people involved in this process. Because I know that we talked a little bit ahead of time about you are wanting to do more research, and more research means more research subjects and people participating and providing examples, et cetera, for you guys to study. So tell us about that. How do people get involved if they want to do more artistic expression for science?
Well, anyone that's interested can just email either of us, and we're always looking for choirs and students and teachers to help in the process, because the more data we can pull from more kids, the more we learn about how students are responding to what we're teaching in our different strategies. So really anyone that if you have a research interest and you can find someone that as a part of their job, email them. They would probably love to partner with anyone that's interested in the same passion, because it's just really a lot of fun when, like, Craig and I have had so much fun working on this stuff together. So I've learned so much by continuing this journey.
Yeah, I think research can be a very lonely thing. It's a lot of time by yourself editing and writing, and it's, you're in a room by yourself. And so having a research partner I know I wouldn't have done half of this stuff if Rebecca hadn't been doing it along with me and giving me deadlines. And, it's very vulnerable to let someone edit your work, but I can read our articles and I don't know which one of us wrote it, right? We work so much together. And it's also great because I'm still in the classroom. And so I'm seeing kids every day. And so I still have my pulse on what that's like all the time. And Rebecca's in research world. And so we both have these strengths that we bring to the table. So finding a research partner that you can be vulnerable with and that you can collaborate with is key to success.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Now, before we kind of wrap this up officially, is there anything that I didn't let either of you get to that you really were hoping to communicate?
So in talking at conferences, coffee talk, right? Pushback I've gotten on this kind of idea is that A, it's too overwhelming, and B, it takes too much time. So people will say, I tried it with my students and they got overwhelmed and they just shut down, right? Because you're asking them to do a lot of things at once. Like Rebecca was saying, we're asking for technique, we're asking them for rhythm, we're asking them for pitch, we're asking them for vowels, we're asking them for expression, all, 17 things at once. And that's the life of a musician. And so my response to them normally is, how long are your phrases? How long are your sections that you're trying to do? Because I found that I teach much shorter sections at a much greater depth when I'm teaching this way, and not necessarily long sections. And that's been really successful to me. And then when I panic because the front end loading is taking so long and we haven't gotten to as much music as I want, I just remind myself that everything I'm teaching in verse 1 is going, most likely, not all the time, but most likely going to transfer to verse 2 or the next section. And so a lot of these skills that I'm spending a lot of time and technique that I'm building in a lot of time teaching in the beginning of the song, it will pay off in the end. You just have to trust the process.
That's great. That's great. Any final words from you, Rebecca? Final thoughts?
I would say keep things simple. Just try one thing. Give yourself a goal. I'm just going to do this one piece, and it might be the simplest of the piece this way, just to see how it works. And stick with it a while, and allow the students to give you as the conductor what they think it should sound like and what is their emotion. Some of the most awesome musical sounds I've made with choirs have been when I've said, I interpret the ending 2 different ways. This way that I would do musically like this, or it might mean this, that maybe I would do musically like this. What is a way that you would interpret this ending and how should it be? And then they tell me, and it's usually something completely different than what I had come up with. And it's so much better. And it was just, you end with this sound because I don't know if it's because it meant more to them, it was more relevant to them, or because they came up with it themselves. But students blow me away. They have great ideas about how to communicate emotion musically that I learn from every day.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me and sharing your wisdom and some of your research. This has been fun.
Yes, thanks so much.
Thanks for having us. This has been fun.
Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. 1, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code. And of course, now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.